I'm interested in hearing a little bit about how the academic program for graduate students has evolved over the years. For example, were there changes in the way that we admitted and recruited grad students? In recent years, it's really competitive and we work very hard to recruit grad students, wining and dining them and so on. And also the group assignment process, how things worked in the early days. Did students arrive already committed to a particular faculty member for research, or was there a process in which they were distributed among the different faculty?
What's your recollection of that, Dietmar?
Well, in inorganic chemistry, we allowed the graduate students just to float around and pick whoever they wanted to work with. This resulted in some unbalanced group sizes, but resulted in satisfied graduate students.
When did they typically start research? Was it
All depends upon the research supervisor they picked. If they picked right, and they were encouraged to start research right away. And that became sort of the modus operandi. Get them in the lab right away.
Mm-hmm. How about the requirements? So I understand that in earlier days, prior to my time, there were all sorts of requirements that had already been eliminated, such as qualifying exams and comprehensive exams on arrival, language requirements, cumulative exams. Can you say something about how that evolved over the years, beginning in the 50s?
I don't even really remember much about the qualifying exams. Do you, Dietmar? When we were both at Harvard, we would have qualifying exams. You had to take them in three, physical, organic, and inorganic.
Right.
At the fall, and if you didn't pass them, you had a chance to take them again in February, and if you didn't pass any then, you had a chance to take them again in June, and if you didn't get all of those passed by that third round, then you were no longer in the PhD program. But did MIT have that? I can't really remember.
We had them, but it didn't last too long. They did away with them.
Maybe we stopped that in a couple of years.
Yeah.
In terms of the organic students coming in, and we're talking about now in the let's say in the early 50s when I started. They're 53. We didn't have very big groups coming in, and and Cope was very interested in supporting the new people, so that at least for the organic groups, who many of whom would have been very happy to begin working with Cope or Sheehan or Buchey or Swain, he would limit the number Cope would limit the number coming into his group so that to spread them out, and we sort of had a unwritten system of maybe not taking more than three in any given year, and if they strongly wanted to work with somebody, and some people would come to MIT specifically to work with Cope, and then Cope would probably know that from the files for applying to MIT for graduate work. But I think it worked out very well. People would basically take on two or three and just tell the people to go find some other place.
Right. When did the cumulative exams begin?
We had at that start in the early 50s, they had major examinations in February of their second year. 3 hours one day, 3 hours the next day, and they had to do a decent performance on those two, and if they didn't, then they would have to wait a whole year to retake them. Big nuisance for somebody to do that. I think the younger people, me and Herb House and the others, thought it would be good to go to the Harvard system. I don't know how many other places were on the CUME system, but we shifted to the CUME system, an examination once a month from October through May, 8, I think, a year, and you had to keep taking them until you passed 8. That's my sort of recollection about it. And that was a system that was used for many years. Now, what other question were you asking me?
That was department wide, by the way.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Dietmar, were there requirements for foreign languages at one point for the graduate students as part of the PhD?
When I came in, I don't think those existed anymore.
Well, when I started in 1953, they had to pass both French and German.
Two languages.
The 2 languages.
What does it mean to pass? What did they have to do?
You have to be able to translate the literature. Somebody who was giving you the exam would pull some book off the shelf and you'd show them that, and then you'd have a certain amount of time to write the answer, to translate the thing. For organic chemistry, I'd say it was a big disadvantage if you did not know how to read German. So much of the earlier synthetic and organic chemistry was all in German.
Sure.
And I can't remember quite when we started shifting over to computers.
When I came in 1957, I don't think we had the language requirement anymore.
I think we did not, department wide. Is that what your recollection is?
I don't know whether it was department wide or not.
I think it was. We would encourage the organic students to know German, but at some point we did stop that as a requirement.
So these days, a very significant percent of our graduate students are women. What was the situation beginning in the 50s, and how did that change during your time on the faculty? What percent would you say were women among the chemistry grad students in the early mid-50s?
Very low.
Very low.
I wouldn't use the word very with it. I had quite a few with me over the years, and I'd have to stop and think how many there were out of the total. But I think of it as quite a few women in that. Never
just attracting.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm thinking of the ones in the organic group. They would be the ones I'd see everybody. No, I would not see everybody. I'd only see the organic graduate students in the coursework that I would be teaching at the graduate level. So the ones that were in physical or inorganic, I think I wouldn't know. Wouldn't know.
I see.
No one knows.
So who were some of the notable graduate students that were in the department that went on to great fame? One of my favorite inorganic students I've heard a lot about is Jay Pudvin. Maybe you could say a little bit about him, Dietmar.
My fictitious graduate student.
What projects did he work on?
Well, he isolated a pure d orbital.
Ah, yes.
Yes, that actually got published in Chemtech and fooled a lot of people. And he was also co-author of How to Researchmanship, or How to Get Your PhD Without Actually Working. And that was sort of below the surface, never really got published except in bits and pieces. But Pudden was quite famous for a while, my most famous graduate student.
Yeah, the picture of him that appeared in the papers looked eerily familiar, actually.
Right. Me from the back cleaning glassware.
A younger version, right?
Right.
Yeah. But seriously, I know Steve Lippard worked with Al Cotton. We must have had some other people who went through the department and went on to great things.
Well, Dick Holm was one, certainly.
Also a Cotton student,
That's right.
Herb House had somebody. I'm trying to remember his
Barry Trost,
Barry Trost, yeah.
and I guess
He was
Leo
quite-
Paquette was a grad student.
Leo Paquette. I think he also worked for Herb, didn't he?
Maybe more.
Was he with more? And who was this one that George Whitesides had a couple of people? Who was the one that went on to Wisconsin? Was it something like
Chuck Casey.
Chuck Casey?
Gary Maysill.
Gary Maysill worked with me. He was in academic chemistry, Colorado. He went to one of the ones in California.
He became strictly NMR.
He did turn 100% NMR, but when he was in California, I think Reagan was governor, and he was so dissatisfied with that he left the state. He went to someplace in Colorado.
I guess Julius Rebeck worked with Dan Kemp.
With Dan Kemp, yes. And of course, he was on our faculty. Julius was.
Yes. After being at
Some
Pittsburgh for many years. So we've talked a little bit about Lester Hamilton, who was executive officer with Professor Cope as department head. You know, these days we have a person who is called the AO, or administrative officer, who's not a faculty member. And I know when I began briefly at the beginning of my time as a faculty member, the executive officer was a professor, Jack Irvine, who I believe was maybe a nuclear chemist originally.
That's right, yeah.
And I know I've heard about Glenn Birchtold at one time being in that position. Very different from the way things work now. What exactly was the responsibilities of the executive officer, and how did it come that they were also a faculty member?
But the ones that Lester Hamilton had as responsibilities extended to
He
being.
made up the list of teaching fellows for each course.
And he did do that. And
Took care of the appointments. He did everything that Cope did not do.
For example,
running
he was
his
the
department.
was the advisor to all the chem majors, and I took
see.
over that role from him pretty soon after I came, when he was still the executive officer. But so that some of the things that Glenn Birchtold would have done when he was executive officer, I think we're already getting farmed out to other members of the department. As I mentioned, I had a lot of responsibility with keeping track of the chem majors, being the advisor to them. In the ensuing years, it got to a much better system where many people in the chemistry department took on just a few chem majors. It's probably still being done that way, would be my guess. But what else? I think that the executive officer, wouldn't they have responsibilities for a lot of things in the facilities area?
Well,
Of the
Hamilton
department.
was jack of all trades.
He was.
He did everything that Cope did not do, essentially.
And he was succeeded by Glenn Birchtold, is that correct?
Who?
Hamilton.
Well, Hamilton did become, yes, when Hamilton retired, Glenn Birchtold was executive officer. Then, not long thereafter, well, how long thereafter would have been the time when these major changes took place with Cope's removal, and then Glenn became acting chairman for a while in that period, 65 to 66, and then John Ross came in as chairperson from Brown, and then Glenn became head of the department in 71. So that was the trajectory that Glenn Birchtold himself took, but I can't remember who.
You know, John Ross, a physical chemist who was brought here by the administration from Brown, that's the last time I believe that we've had a department head who was from outside the department as opposed to one of the current faculty. What were the circumstances that led to that rather unusual move?
Well, he was the last one they could find. They made a whole bunch of other offers before they got Ross.
offers to people outside the department?
Outside, yes. I think the decision was to go outside. The idea was that the department had become too subservient to Cope over the years, and there was no really independent person in the department.
I see.
It probably was a good decision to bring in somebody from the outside.
I think it was a necessary decision.
I think it wasn't necessary?
I think so.
Yeah, I would sort of agree
Did
with
Ross make any significant changes on arrival?
Not that I recall.
No, I don't remember,
Mhm.
except as maybe we've commented on in an earlier session, the whole department became a much more democratic organization
Mhm.
than it was under the benign autocracy of Cope. Maybe not so benign to some people.
Benign from the perspective of the organic faculty.
Right, the physical chemist did not care for him.
Did not know. But I'd so that by the time that Ross was there, Glenn had been acting chair for a couple of years, and I think even then the things like new appointments, were we even making new appointments in that period? Probably not. Imagine it just sort of took a hiatus on that, but maybe your list would reveal that. But so I think it. But as we proceeded forward, then things like new appointments. There's a committee that would consider if any division needed new appointments or new people leaving or new people they ought to be trying to hire. I think that you tell the appointments committee to look at those, and then if then they would report to the whole faculty.
That's right. We had an appointments committee all of a sudden.
And so that and other decisions about the department were being done through chemistry faculty meetings, which had not been the main path for decision making prior to that period. And then so my guess is that the people are largely interested in their research and their own teaching, but they will come together and make some decisions if needs be. Would that be the way you would look at that,
Yeah.
Dietmar?
Yeah.